Hi guys, and welcome to another National Open round recap. I know I skipped one day, so this is a little late. My games yesterday lasted absolutely forever, so we're doing this a little bit late, but that's fine. This game, round four, took almost 6 hours. My opponent, we just played such a long game, and it was completely brutal. But I did win, so if you win, that's always a good thing. Even if it does take 6 hours. Actually, I think it was more like 5.5, but it was still a really long game. So we started e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6. My opponent is about 2000 and he's like 17, I think, so, or maybe 15. I don't know, man. I'm just playing kids all tournament, and I was like, yo, this is going to be one of those games. And I was right. It was one of those games. So I knew he was going to play the bishop opening. After d3, knight c6, knight f6, bishop e7, castle, h3, d6, c3, knight a5, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop c2, we actually transpose back into a line of like the d3 Spanish, which I am a little bit more familiar with relative to other openings, and I was feeling pretty good about my position. So I play c5 to give myself a little bit of space to control the center, very typical for these kind of Spanishes as black. He goes knight b to d2, I play h6. Goes rook e1, I play bishop e6, knight f1, knight c6, moving my knight back because it doesn't really do anything on a5, just played it there so I could play c5. Knight to g3, queen to c7. And the idea behind queen c7 is that I want to defend e5 so that I can push d5, and when I push d5, he takes, bishop takes, my pawn on e5 is not hanging. After knight h2, I play d5, goes knight to g4. I decide to play d4. And, there's a lot of upside downsides to playing a move like d4, which kind of closes the position. I thought that d4 would be an interesting move. I'm playing for a win, first of all, as black, so that's already a little bit tough. You don't really want to swap off pieces when you're playing for a win, because it makes it easier for your opponent to draw, logic. And I decided that this would be one of those positions where, I play for a win with d4. And I'm not entirely like certain that this was the absolute best move. The engine does like knight takes g4, and if he plays h takes g4, maybe then play d4, and after knight f5, he has like a slightly worse pawn structure. I wasn't a huge fan of that because I was always afraid of like g5 ideas, so I decided to play d4 immediately. After queen f3, I play bishop g5. My dark squared bishop is kind of behind pawns, so this is a very common idea in the Spanish to swap off your dark squared bishop like this when you don't have your pawn fianchettoed. That's an important point. He goes knight f5. I play queen to d8 in order to, really play queen f6 or take on g5 in case he plays bishop takes g5. He plays c takes d4. And I think this was a really bad move by him because I get to play bishop takes f5, and after e takes f5, I have knight takes d4, and all of a sudden, his light square bishop is really bad. Well, it hasn't been great for most of the game, but it's especially bad now. And also, I get my knight into the middle of the board, and it's hitting the queen, it's hitting the bishop, it's hitting this pawn. I'm about to win a pawn. So he goes queen to d1. And after queen to d1, I should have played queen to f6 in order to defend this pawn and threaten the f5 pawn at the same time. I, for some reason, thought he might play g4, but in hindsight, g4 looks like an absolutely terrible move. Like, I thought about all of this, and I was like, I don't win a pawn. But his king is really weak. And I always have opportunities to play against the d3 pawn, which is an isolated pawn, and I have like all the control over this d file. So in hindsight, queen f6 would have been the better positional move. I play rook e8 because I was like, I'm gonna develop my rook, defend the center, what could possibly go wrong? He goes bishop b3, I play knight takes f5, queen to f3, and now I make a slight inaccuracy. So I play queen to d7, missing that he has bishop takes g5, h takes g5, rook takes e5, and when I take back with the rook, he has queen takes a8 check. I'm still better in this position, but I could have avoided all of this by playing queen to f6 instead of queen d7. And if he plays queen to d5, I had bishop to h4, which I had actually missed. This is sort of like, well, it's not quite a double attack, but I can't really play something like rook c8. It's just, he's going to take here, and then after taking, he's going to play rook c1, and then defending pawns gets a little too hard. But I did have bishop to h4 here. And once he takes, I can go rook a to d8, threaten this. We're going to threaten f2 soon. Yeah, his position is a little bit of a mess because he's not very well developed. But I missed all of that, played queen d7. This all happened. And after queen takes a8 check, king h7. He can play queen takes a6. He didn't play this. I was thinking about rook e2 during the game because I was going to take on b2. So it's not exactly a free pawn for him. He instead goes queen f3. Engine loves king to g6 here. I was not going to play king to g6. That was something I thought about for a whole 30 seconds. I was like, nah, that's like an engine move, you know? And even if it was good, what am I going to do after it? So I decided not to play it. But the idea behind this move is really good. You just want to play knight to d4, and he actually doesn't have any checks against my king. And this would have been basically positionally crushing because then I get rook to e2. He can't kick my knight out. I can move my queen up. I'm threatening the b2 pawn. His position would have been miserable. I'm not that good of a player, so I play king g8, queen a8, king h7, queen f3. I'm actually not trying to draw the game. I just wanted to gain some time because, yeah, I had like maybe 18 minutes left. And I decided to play knight to h6 because I didn't want to play king g6, and I had to somehow deal with this entire like weak f7 pawn idea. So after knight h6, a4, I play queen to d4, hitting the b2 pawn, and he has to play rook b1 to defend. I take on a4, bishop c4, and I'm up a pawn, but it's a double pawn, so it doesn't look very pretty, and also it barely counts as an extra pawn. If he plays bishop takes f7, I still have rook f5, so he can't take that. So bishop c4, a5, queen d1, g4, h takes, knight takes, queen f3, knight h6, g3, g6. Here, apparently g5 was really good. And, I mean, see, this is one of those problems where I knew I was better in this position, but realistically, am I going to be making moves like g5? Like, am I going to? Probably not, right? Like, this is probably a little bit beyond my pay grade, honestly. This is essentially just a much better version of what happened in the game after g6, king g2, king g7, rook h1, rook f5, knight g4, and I'm not actually sure like where I was completely winning, but engine likes knight takes c4. I saw this line, and after rook f6, I was wondering what happens on rook d1. And I saw this as well. And I saw this. And I was calculating this. And I was wondering about this. And I saw this. And this. And apparently this is winning? Oh, because I have a4, and then I can play this, and then play a2 and a1. So I calculated as far as this, and then thought about a2, and this is a draw. So what I really missed was a4. That's a bit sad. That's unfortunate. Well, it happens. I played knight d7, which obviously doesn't really give me an advantage anymore, but I didn't want to play that position where I, you know, thought it was actually a draw. At least this gives me chances. Just a simple miscalculation, really. Queen f2, knight b6, rook to e1. I play queen d6, queen d7 because I actually don't want to trade off the queens. Very badly. He still has like a slightly weak king, so I want to play like rook to h5 and maybe queen h3. He goes queen to e3, and now knight takes c4, d takes c4, queen b7, queen e4, queen takes b2. I knew I was winning. I now have 2 extra pawns, and they're both still pass pawns. So after rook e2, I play queen f6, rook a2, rook h5, g4. And here I missed rook to h4. So this is another one of those problems where I saw rook to h4, and I just couldn't see why it would be better than rook h8, so I didn't play it. But after rook h4, king to g3, I have this move g5, and if he plays f takes g5, I just play queen takes g5. And if at any point he tries to take on a4, I just go rook h6, and I'm like, yo, buddy, you're getting checkmated in this queen-rook endgame. And I wish I was a good enough player to see moves like this or even conceptualize moves like this, but I did not even think about playing g5. I kid you not, I didn't even think about playing g5. It's just a move that makes a lot of sense when you look at analysis because it helps your queen get over to h6, or, you know, it helps your queen get onto the h-file in order to attack his really weak king, and also helps you play queen to c3 if he doesn't do anything, because now the rook's protected. So the move makes a lot of sense. I just didn't see it, and these are the kind of moves that I need to start seeing if I really want to like play better. So after rook h8, he goes queen e5, I take, and I'm still winning this endgame, you know? I'm still winning here. It's not like it's not going great for me, but I didn't really think about f6. I'm not even sure if f6 is really that good. This looks like a draw, so the move the engine wants me to play here is rook a8, defending this, and then I guess if he takes, I take, and then slowly move my king over, and then it would be a win. Instead I played rook b8 for some reason, thinking that after rook takes a4, rook b4, rook takes c4, this is actually a winning endgame. And king f3, g5, king e3, king f8, king d3, rook d4 check, king e3, rook c4. I'm obviously not going to draw, so I played rook takes g4, rook takes c5, king e7, rook c6, rook f4, king e3, rook f1, king e4, g4. This is apparently also a draw. For some reason in my head, I was like, yo, I'm doing pretty well in this position. And the reason for that is because his one move here is king to e3. And king to e3 doesn't make a lot of sense because I'm going to play g3, right? But then he plays rook to c2. And then if I play rook to f2, he can always... No, that is a loss. He can't take, but he can play rook... Nope, he can't play that either, because then I have king e6 going for the e5 pawn. He has to play rook c8, king e6, rook g8. There we go. I call this the mushroom skewer, where you defend your opponent's pass pawn, or you attack your opponent's pass pawn from behind. Think of it as like a skewer. But I didn't see king e3, and neither did my opponent, thankfully. Instead, he played rook to c3, and I played f5. And once, you know, the pawns are traded, this is not a fileter position. The king has to be on g1 for it to be a fileter, or in front of the pawn for it to be a fileter position. And I knew I was going to comfortably get the Lucina position out of this position eventually. And that's exactly what I did. So I played like rook f4, rook f7, king h3, rook king to g2, rook g8, rook to e7, check, pushing away the king because he has nowhere to go. And after g3, rook g6, king f2, rook f6, king g1, rook g6, g2, king d3, rook h7, king e2, king h1. There's no way for him to stop promotion. He can try king f2, but I have rook f7, check, pushing his king away again, and then I queen. And then I can win the rook and king endgame once he takes. So yeah, this game took 5.5 hours from start to finish, and by the end of it I was exhausted. You have to keep in mind these are 90 plus 30-minute games with 30 minutes after move 40, And for a 2-round-a-day schedule, it's kind of brutal. After this game, I was like, shoot, I still have to play another tough opponent later in the evening. And we can see how that game went really quickly. So the recap of round 5 is going to be quite brief because I was dead tired and just didn't play a very good game. Like, even if I wanted to play a really good game, I couldn't. This was like really late at night for me. I finished a 5.5 hour game earlier, and I had like maybe 45 minutes of rest, and I was like, oh man, this is brutal. So I played this Spanish, and after d6, c3, bishop d7, castle g6, played bishop g5, bishop g7, queen c1. The idea is for me to go bishop h6 after he castles, so he plays h6. I go bishop e3, he goes g5, I play rook e1, a6, bishop takes, knight bt2. And I think already by here, I was like, what's going on in this position? Because you don't really see an early h6, g5 on black very often. So I was trying to play off of intuition, and my intuition at this point of the day was pretty bad. So I thought knight bd2 was fine, and after knight h5, I tried knight f1, f5, knight g3, knight takes, f takes, queen castle. This isn't necessarily like losing or anything, but he does have the pair of bishops, and I already have double pawns. So I'm already going into a worse endgame against an international master who's like 200 points higher rated than me, so I knew this was like going to be a tough endgame to hold. And I really try my best to hold this endgame. If I shouldn't have played knight bd2 probably in the first place. Should have just played queen d1 to avoid any knight h5 ideas. And if he ever castles, I mean, now I can play knight b to d2. And if he decides to go for my bishop, well, I'll just let him go for my bishop. Or I can play bishop to c1 and avoid all of the like double pawn madness that happened. So I thought I was just going to draw this endgame realistically after like a couple of hours, but my opponent really wanted to push for a win. And after rook f1, queen to d7, queen to d1, rook f8, queen e2, rook f7, knight d2, I'm trying to trade off the rooks because he has control of the open file currently, and I want to gain control of that back. He plays g4, I play rook takes, rook f1, h5, and I go b3, queen e6. b3 was mostly anticipation of queen e6, so I don't lose the a2 pawn. I take, play bishop g5, and instead of maybe bishop g5, I could have played h4 here, and or even just like queen f2, you know. With bishop g5, king e8, queen e3, I was trying to get this bishop h4, queen g5 structure because I just wanted something to do in this position, and try to do things in this endgame was maybe the wrong idea because I did a little too much and weakened my pawn structure, had my pieces in awkward positions, and then ended up losing the position. So king d7, bishop h4, queen g6. I trade off queens because I'm like, oh, I'm not going to lose this minor piece endgame. Queen takes g5, bishop takes d5, king f2, b6, and now I play knight f1, which is really bad because he gets to play e4. And if I take, well, he gets to take, oh, sorry, he takes on c3, actually. And he has like a major pawn against my two pawns over here, which means that he can create a pass pawn fairly easily. I still would have preferred to go into this position over what happened in the game, but regardless, this was still not very good. So after d4, bishop b7, knight e3, I'm already heading in the wrong direction with my endgame. So c5, and here I had to spot knight to f5. And if it goes bishop to h6, I can, if it goes bishop h8, I can go bishop to h6, trying to trade off the dark squared bishop. And if my pawns are on dark squares, it's harder for him to get them. Also, his h pawn would be weak. Instead, I played knight c2. I hallucinated, and I'll tell you in a moment why. a5, bishop e3, king c6, c4. So here, okay, after d takes c4, pawn takes, bishop a6, I thought I could play I thought I could play, for some reason, knight to a3. Or I thought I could play d5, king to d7, knight to a3, knight to b6, b5, sorry. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get opposite color bishop endgame. If I swap off my knight for his light square bishop, we're both still left with dark squared bishops. There was no opposite color bishop endgame. I was so tired at this point that I wasn't even thinking about such simple concepts straight. And that's the main reason why I let this happen. And after d takes c5, b takes c5, bishop d2, I was like, oh, I'm a little screwed in this endgame. And I lost it pretty quickly after. There was just nothing I could realistically do. His bishops were too strong. I had to trade my knight for this one. And although I get an opposite color bishop endgame, his passed pawns are just way too strong. And h3, king e4, king d1, bishop d5, h takes g4, h takes g4. I just decided to resign because if I go king c1 or anything, he can just play bishop to f3. This looks really cool, but he just has too many pawns, and I couldn't do anything. Oh well, it happens. Regardless, I tried my very best with this game my very best given that I had played a really long game earlier. Note to myself that American tournaments are kind of brutal. 2 rounds a day is very, very tough when you're playing like almost 6 hours for your first game. And yeah, I think this was just a really good lesson, knowing that this tournament format is just probably not very good for trying to gain rating. It's good for getting practice in, or if you're on a busy schedule, but trying to gain rating on this is just probably impossible. At least for somebody like me who, yeah, where I'm trying to like do a bunch of other stuff apart from just playing chess, it's a little bit harder. But nonetheless, I think this was still a really educational game for myself. I think I need to look at the D3 Spanish, and my first game of the day I felt really happy with because I grinded out that entire game for a win, and I think younger me would have been very proud of myself. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this recap video, and make sure you're clicking the thumbs up button as well as subscribing and leaving a comment down below. Thank you guys so much for watching.